Welcome to my channel. Today I want to tell you a story. Not just any story. This is the story of a man who spent 27 long years in prison. 27 years behind cold walls, eating simple food, sleeping on the floor, and waiting for freedom that never seemed to come. But here is the miracle. When the prison gates finally opened, he did not walk out angry. He did not walk out with hate in his heart. He walked out smiling. He walked out with peace. He walked out ready to forgive the very people who had locked him away. This man was treated as less than human for most of his life. He was told he could not vote. He was told he could not live where he wanted. He was told he was not equal. But instead of breaking down, he stood up. Instead of giving up, he chose to fight. Not with weapons, but with courage, with hope, and with love for his people. And the world began to listen. His name is Nelson Mandela. He was born in a small village, with no power, no wealth, and no title. Yet he became one of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen. He showed us that real strength is not in revenge, but in forgiveness. He showed us that real leadership is not about power, but about serving others. And he showed us that even one person, one voice, can change history forever. So stay with me, because this story is not just about South Africa. It is not just about politics. It is about the human spirit. It is about what happens when you do not let pain destroy you, but instead let pain shape you into someone greater. This is the story of Nelson Mandela. And if you listen with your heart, this story may change your life to Chapter 1. The early life of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was born in the year 1918. He was born in a small village called Mvizo in South Africa. The world at that time was very different. South Africa was a country divided by race. White people had most of the power, while black people had very few rights. But Mandela was just a baby then. He did not know how hard life would become for him. He was given the name Ralilala by his family. In his language, Ralilala means troublemaker. It was almost like a sign of what was to come, because this little boy would one day trouble the system of injustice and change the world. But as a child, he was just like many others, innocent, playful, and full of dreams. Mandela grew up in a simple home. There was no electricity, no big houses, no cars around him. Life in the village was quiet. Children played in the fields. They ran barefoot. They made toys from sticks and mud. They laughed and chased animals. Mandela spent much of his childhood herding cattle. He would take the cows to graze and sit for hours, watching them eat. Sometimes he would sit under the big trees, looking at the sky, thinking about life, though he was still very young. He helped his family with farming, planting seeds, and collecting food. His childhood was poor in money, but rich in nature, culture, and love. Even in those simple days, Mandela began to notice something strange. He saw that black children like him had very few chances. They had small schools, or sometimes no schools at all. Their classrooms were made of mud. Their teachers had little to teach, and sometimes the children had to walk for hours just to reach school. Meanwhile, he heard that white children had big schools, good books, and many opportunities. As a young boy, Mandela could feel the unfairness, even if he did not fully understand it yet. This was the first seed of justice planted in his heart. He saw that life was not equal, and it bothered him deeply. When Mandela was about 7 years old, his life changed in a small but important way. He was sent to school. His teacher, who was English, could not say his African name easily, so she gave him a new name, Nelson. This was common at the time. Teachers gave African children European names. It was a way of control, a way of saying their African identity was not enough. Imagine being a small child and someone changes your name. You do not choose it, but you must accept it. Mandela carried this name for the rest of his life. But deep inside, he always knew he was Ralilala. The boy meant to stir things up. The boy meant to challenge the world. In school, Mandela was quiet, shy, and polite. He listened carefully. He loved stories of African heroes, kings, and warriors. These stories were told to him by elders in the village around the fire. They spoke of leaders who fought for their people, leaders who were brave, leaders who put their community before themselves. These stories gave Mandela hope. They taught him that leadership was not about power, but about serving others. He carried these lessons in his heart. Mandela's father, who was a respected leader in the village, died when Mandela was only 9 years old. This was a painful moment for him. Losing a father at such a young age is never easy. But this tragedy also opened a new door. Mandela was sent to live with a chief, a powerful leader, who promised to take care of him. Living with the chief gave Mandela a chance to see leadership more closely. He watched how meetings were held, how men spoke, how problems were solved. He saw that true leaders listened more than they spoke. He saw that wisdom often came from silence. These lessons stayed with him and shaped his own style of leadership later in life. As he grew older, Mandela began to feel a fire inside him. He wanted to learn more. He wanted to see the bigger world beyond his village. He wanted to understand why life was so different for Black people and white people. At that time, South Africa was under a system that pushed Black people down. They could not own land freely. They could not vote. They had to carry passes to move from one place to another. Mandela did not know yet that this system was called apartheid, but he could already feel its heavy hand on his people. Mandela was still a boy, but his heart was already restless. He was curious, he was observant, and he was beginning to ask questions. Why must Black children walk barefoot to school while white children ride in carts? Why must Black families work for low wages while white families lived in big houses? Why must African names be replaced by English names? These questions did not have easy answers. But these questions planted a seed of courage inside him, a courage that would grow with time. This little boy, Ralilala, who herded cattle, who lost his father, who was renamed without his choice, was slowly being shaped by the world around him. A simple child in a simple village, with no power, no voice, and no wealth. And yet, this same boy would one day rise to become the voice for millions, the symbol of freedom for South Africa, and a global icon of justice. Chapter 2: Education and First Steps into Activism. Nelson Mandela was the first person in his family to receive formal education. For his family and his village, this was a big moment. Education was not common for Black children in South Africa at that time. Many children worked in the fields or helped with cattle and farming. Few had the chance to sit in a classroom. Mandela's family believed that education could open doors, and Mandela himself felt that learning was the key to a better life. He worked hard, he listened carefully, and he always wanted to know more. Every book, every lesson, felt like a new world opening in front of him. He did not know it then, but education would prepare him to fight one of the biggest battles in history. As Mandela grew older, he continued his schooling in larger towns and better institutions. He was shy, but he was also sharp, curious, and determined. At school, He began to see more clearly the deep lines that divided South Africa. White children had good classrooms, libraries, and resources, while black children had old books, poor facilities, and overcrowded rooms. Mandela felt this unfairness strongly. But instead of making him bitter, it made him more determined. He thought to himself, if I can learn, if I can grow, maybe I can help change things. Mandela's hunger for knowledge eventually took him to university. He first studied at the University of Fort Hare, one of the few places in South Africa where black students could study at a higher level. For many young men and women, Fort Hare was more than a school. It was a place of dreams. It was where the future leaders of South Africa were born. Mandela was excited to be there, but he soon discovered that even at the university, life was not free. Students were controlled, their voices silenced, and they were expected to obey without question. Mandela, however, was not the type to stay silent forever. At Fort Hare, Mandela met other young people who felt the same fire inside. They were tired of being treated as second-class citizens in their own land. They were tired of walking on roads marked for whites only. They were tired of being told where they could and could not live. They were tired of watching their parents work hard for little pay while others enjoyed wealth and comfort. Together, they began to speak up. They formed student groups, they discussed ideas, and they dreamed of a free South Africa. One emotional moment came when Mandela and other students joined a protest against the strict university rules. This was dangerous. Speaking against authority could mean punishment or even expulsion. Mandela took part, showing that his courage was already growing. In the end, he was asked to leave the university because of his involvement in the protest. It was a painful setback, but in truth, it was also a beginning. Mandela was learning one of the most important lessons of his life, that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear, but standing up anyway. After leaving Fort Hare, Mandela moved to Johannesburg, one of the largest cities in South Africa. Life there was not easy. He had to work many small jobs to survive. He worked as a guard at a mine, as a clerk, and as a helper. He was often poor, sometimes hungry, but he never gave up on his dream of education. Finally, Mandela enrolled in law school. He wanted to study law because he believed that the law was supposed to bring justice. But in South Africa, the law was twisted. The law itself was unfair, designed to keep black people down and powerless. Mandela wanted to understand this system, not just to obey it, but to challenge it. During his law studies, Mandela met other bright and brave young men. Together, they started asking bigger questions. Why could black people not vote in their own country? Why did they need special passes to travel from one city to another? Why were their neighborhoods only for whites, while black families were pushed into poor, crowded areas far away? Why were schools, buses, hospitals, and even toilets divided by race? The more Mandela studied the law, the more he saw its cruelty. The law was not protecting people. It was being used as a weapon against them. Mandela was deeply moved by what he saw in the courts. He watched poor black men and women stand before white judges who gave them no chance of fairness. They were fined, jailed, or punished harshly for small things. Mandela's heart burned with anger, but also with determination. He knew that he wanted to be more than just a lawyer. He wanted to be a voice for those who had none. At the same time, Mandela became more active in political groups. He joined student organizations and later connected with the African National Congress, ANC, a group fighting for the rights of black South Africans. These meetings were powerful. They were filled with speeches, ideas, and plans for a future that seemed impossible but necessary. Mandela listened, learned, and slowly became a leader. His friends noticed his courage, his calm voice, and his ability to inspire others. But this also meant danger. The government of South Africa did not like voices of protest. They feared educated black men like Mandela who could challenge the system. Mandela and his friends were watched closely. Police followed their movements. Secret agents sat in meetings. Mandela knew that at any moment he could be arrested. He felt fear, but he also felt strength. He reminded himself again and again that courage was not about being fearless. It was about acting, even when fear was heavy in your heart. By the time Mandela finished his law studies, he was no longer just a student. He was becoming a fighter for justice. He was no longer just Ralilola the boy or Nelson the student. He was a young man ready to stand for his people. The government was beginning to notice him. Something big was coming. The struggle for freedom was about to grow louder, and Mandela would be at the center of it. Chapter 3. The fight against apartheid South Africa in the early and mid-1900s was controlled by a system called apartheid. Apartheid was a cruel system of laws that separated people by race. The word apartheid itself means apartness. It was designed to keep white people in power and to keep black people without rights. Under apartheid, white people had control over the land, the government, and the economy. Black people, who were the majority of the population, had almost nothing. They could not vote. They could not choose where to live. They could not move freely. The entire system was built on unfairness. The rules of apartheid were seen everywhere. Black people and white people could not go to the same schools. Black children studied in small, poor classrooms with very few books. White children had big schools with new desks, libraries, and playgrounds. Even buses were divided, some for whites, some for blacks. Black people had to sit in the back or use different transport altogether. Hospitals were separate. Restaurants were separate. Even toilets were separate. White and black people could not marry each other. If they tried, it was against the law. Families were broken, lives were destroyed, and dignity was stolen every single day. For Mandela, this was not just unfair. It was unbearable. He had studied the law, and he knew that these laws were not about justice. They were about control. He could not stand by and watch while millions of people suffered. He wanted change. He wanted freedom. He wanted equality. And he knew he was not alone. Mandela became active in the African National Congress, also known as the ANC. The ANC was one of the oldest organizations fighting for the rights of black South Africans. At first, the ANC believed in peaceful resistance. They organized marches, petitions, and protests. They asked the government to treat black people fairly, but the government ignored them. Mandela quickly rose as a young leader within the ANC. People admired his calm voice, his clear words, and his fearless attitude. He was not only intelligent, but also full of courage. In the 1950s, Mandela and his friends in the ANC began organizing more protests and strikes. Thousands of people joined. They marched on the streets, demanding freedom. They refused to carry the hated pass books, which were documents black people were forced to carry just to move around the country. Without these passes, they could be arrested at any time. Mandela said, "No, we cannot live like this." He encouraged people to stand tall, to speak loudly, and to fight with dignity. But the government was cruel and violent. Police attacked peaceful marches. Protesters were beaten, jailed, and sometimes even killed. One of the most shocking moments was the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. That day, thousands of black men and women marched peacefully against past laws. Police opened fire on them, killing 69 people, including children, and injuring many more. The world was horrified. South Africa was burning, and Mandela knew something had to change. After Sharpeville, Mandela and others realized that peaceful protest alone was not enough. The government responded only with guns, prisons, and violence. So Mandela and his colleagues decided to create a new movement called Umkhonto we Sizwe, meaning Spear of the Nation. It was the armed wing of the ANC. Its goal was not to kill innocent people, but to sabotage government buildings, railways, and systems that kept apartheid alive. They wanted to send a message: apartheid would not last forever. Mandela became one of the leaders of this movement. He traveled across South Africa, secretly meeting groups, organizing resistance, and inspiring people. His voice became the voice of hope. His face became the face of courage. People whispered his name in villages and cities. They believed he could lead them to freedom. But at the same time, the government was watching closely. Mandela was hunted like a criminal. He wore disguises. He traveled at night. He lived on the run. Newspapers even began calling him the Black Pimpernel, because he escaped capture again and again. But the government was determined to silence him. In 1962, Mandela was finally arrested. He was accused of leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike. Later, more charges were added, including sabotage against the apartheid system. His trial became famous around the world. Instead of denying his actions, Mandela spoke boldly in court. He admitted that he fought against apartheid because it was evil, and he said he was ready to die for freedom if necessary. His words shook the courtroom, and they would later shake the entire world. The court found him guilty. Mandela was sentenced to life in prison. For many, this felt like the end of hope. A brave leader silenced and locked away. But for Mandela, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The government thought they could break his spirit. Instead, they only made him stronger. And so, in 1962, Nelson Mandela entered prison as a young man with dreams of freedom. He did not know he would spend 27 years inside those walls. He did not know the suffering that awaited him. But he also did not know that one day he would walk out of that same prison, not as a broken man, but as the future president of South Africa. The fight against apartheid was entering its darkest chapter, and Mandela was at the very heart of it. Chapter 4: 27 years in prison when Nelson Mandela was sent to prison. The government thought it was the end of his story. They believed that locking him away would silence him forever. They hoped that people would forget about him. But they were wrong. Prison did not end Mandela's story. It made it stronger. Mandela was taken to Robben Island, a small island near Cape Town. This place was not just a prison. It was a place designed to break the human spirit. His cell was very small, just a few feet wide. There was no bed, only a thin mat on the floor. He had a small bucket to use as a toilet. The walls were cold, the nights were long, and the days were filled with hard labor. Prisoners were forced to break stones into smaller pieces, hour after hour, under the hot sun. Mandela's hands became rough and torn. His body grew tired, but his spirit refused to give up. Even worse, Mandela was separated from his family. He could not see them freely. Sometimes years passed before he was allowed even a short visit. Letters from home were rare, and when they came, they were often censored or cut into pieces by prison guards. Mandela missed his wife, his children, his friends. He felt deep pain in his heart. Imagine being a father who cannot watch his children grow. Imagine being a husband who cannot hold his wife's hand. That was Mandela's life for decades. Yet he carried his pain with dignity. He did not allow it to crush him. Inside the prison, Mandela created a new kind of strength. He turned Robben Island into what he called a university. He studied every day, reading books on law, politics, and history. He also taught younger prisoners, sharing lessons of leadership, discipline, and hope. Even in chains, he was still a leader. He told his fellow prisoners that their bodies could be locked up, but their minds must stay free. This gave them courage to survive the darkest days. The prison guards treated Mandela and the other political prisoners harshly. They gave them little food, poor clothing, and hard punishments. But Mandela never shouted in anger. He treated the guards with respect, even when they insulted him. Slowly, even some guards began to admire his calmness and dignity. Mandela showed them that true power is not in cruelty, but in self-control. Outside the prison, something powerful was happening. Mandela's name was not forgotten. In fact, it became a symbol of hope. People across South Africa began to chant his name during protests. They carried posters with his face. They sang songs about him. And this movement did not stop at South Africa's borders. Across the world, in London, in New York, in Paris, in India, in Australia, people marched in the streets shouting, "Free Nelson Mandela." Students, workers, leaders, and even famous musicians called for his release. Mandela had become a global symbol of freedom. He was no longer just a man in a cell. He was an idea, and an idea cannot be imprisoned. One powerful moment came in 1988 when millions of people around the world celebrated Mandela's 70th birthday with concerts and marches. Even though Mandela could not see it from inside his cell, the world was singing for him. This showed the South African government that they could not hide him anymore. His voice was louder outside prison than it had ever been inside. Still, the years passed slowly for Mandela. Year after year, he remained behind bars. He entered prison as a young man in his 40s, full of energy and life. He stayed there until his hair turned gray and his body grew older. 27 years is a lifetime. But Mandela never gave up hope. He always believed he would be free one day, and that South Africa would be free too. By the late 1980s, the world was changing. The pressure on South Africa's government grew stronger. The economy was weak. The people were restless. The world was watching. Finally, the leaders of the country knew that they could no longer keep Mandela locked away. They had to talk to him. Secret meetings began between Mandela and government officials. Even inside prison, he was negotiating for the future of his people. Then came the historic moment. On February 11th, 1990, after 27 long years, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison. The world held its breath. Millions of people watched on television. Mandela appeared, tall and calm, holding the hand of his wife Winnie, and raising his fist in the air. The streets filled with cheers, songs, and tears of joy. South Africa was alive with hope. But as Mandela stepped into freedom, a new question appeared. The fight was not over. Apartheid was still in place. The country was still divided, and violence was still happening. Mandela was free, but what would he do now? Would he choose revenge or forgiveness? Would he choose war or peace? The world was waiting. The story was about to enter its most powerful chapter. Chapter 5: Freedom and Forgiveness. On February 11th, 1990, the world saw a moment it would never forget. After 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela walked free. The cameras showed him walking slowly, his wife Winnie by his side. His hair was gray now, his body older, but his spirit was unbroken. As he stepped out, he raised his fist high in the air. That single gesture was powerful. It was a sign of strength, of victory, and of hope. Millions of people watching on television cried tears of joy. In the streets of South Africa, people sang, danced, and hugged each other. For them, Mandela was not just a man. He was freedom itself. Many people expected Mandela to come out angry. After all, he had lost almost 3 decades of his life in prison. He had missed the childhood of his children. He had suffered loneliness, hard labor, and humiliation. Most men would have come out with bitterness in their hearts. But Mandela was different. The first words he spoke were not of revenge, but of peace. He said he wanted a South Africa where black and white people could live together in harmony. He said that freedom would mean nothing if it only replaced one injustice with another. Mandela had chosen forgiveness over hate. This was not easy. Mandela had to sit face to face with the very leaders who had once called him a terrorist, the same men who had ordered his arrest, his punishment, and his suffering. He shook their hands. He spoke to them with respect. He told them that South Africa needed peace, not more bloodshed. This was one of the most powerful moments in history. The world asked, how can a man forgive after so much pain? The answer was simple yet difficult. Mandela believed that hate only keeps people prisoners. Forgiveness sets them free. At this time, South Africa was still burning with anger. Violence broke out in many places. Black and white communities clashed. Political groups fought in the streets. It seemed like the country might fall into a civil war. But Mandela's voice was steady. He traveled across the nation, speaking in towns and cities. He told people not to seek revenge, but to seek peace. He reminded them that freedom was not about destroying each other, but about building a nation together. His calmness was like a light in the darkness. Mandela also began working closely with the government that had once jailed him. He met President F.W. de Klerk, a white leader who realized that apartheid could not survive any longer. Together, they started negotiations to end the system. It was not easy. There were many arguments, many fears, and many dangers. But Mandela never lost his patience. He believed that South Africa's future could only be built on dialogue, not war. His ability to forgive, to negotiate, and to lead impressed the world. The climax of Mandela's journey came in 1994. South Africa held its first democratic election. For the first time in history, black and white people stood side by side to cast their votes. Long lines stretched across the country. Some people waited for hours, even days, just to place their vote. For many black South Africans, it was the very first time they were allowed to vote. The joy was overwhelming. Old men and women, who had lived their entire lives without a voice, now finally had one. And when the results came, they brought tears to the eyes of millions. Nelson Mandela, once called a criminal, once locked in a cell, was now chosen as the president of South Africa. It was a moment the world had never seen before. Mandela, who had been treated as less than human, now stood as the leader of the nation. He became the first black president of South Africa. The crowds cheered, the flags waved, and the songs of freedom filled the air. Mandela himself stood humbly, smiling, knowing that his victory was not his alone. It was the victory of every man, woman, and child who had suffered under apartheid. But Mandela's greatness was not only in winning power. His greatness was in what he chose to do with it. Many leaders in his position might have sought revenge. Many might have punished their enemies. But Mandela chose a different path. He built a government of unity. He invited his old enemies to join him. He wore the jersey of the white South African rugby team to show that all people belonged to one nation. He showed the world that forgiveness was not weakness, it was strength. This chapter of Mandela's life is one of the most powerful lessons for humanity. He proved that peace is possible, even after years of hate. He proved that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. He proved that one man, with courage and love in his heart, can change not only a country but the entire world. And so, the boy named Ralilela, the prisoner named Nelson Mandela, became the president of South Africa. A man once called a criminal was now the father of a free nation. His life was the living proof that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, can come true. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela became president in 1994, but he made a very surprising choice. Unlike many leaders, he decided to serve only one term. He could have stayed in power longer. People loved him, and many wanted him to remain president. But Mandela believed leadership was not about holding power forever. It was about serving, guiding, and then passing the torch to others. This decision showed the world his humility. He was not a man of power for himself. He was a man of purpose for his people. During his presidency, Mandela worked to rebuild a nation that had been broken for decades. South Africa was not just divided by laws, but also by wounds in the hearts of its people. Mandela focused on education, because he believed that schools and learning were the most powerful weapons to fight poverty and inequality. He once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Under his leadership, new schools were built. Children who were once excluded could now sit in classrooms together, and hope began to grow in the hearts of young South Africans. But Mandela's mission went far beyond schools. He worked tirelessly to promote peace. He encouraged South Africans of every race to see each other not as enemies, but as neighbors. He created programs to bring communities together, to help victims of violence, and to teach forgiveness. One of the most remarkable things he did was establish the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Instead of simply punishing people for the crimes of apartheid, Mandela supported a system where people could confess their wrongs, face the truth, and seek forgiveness. This was not easy. It required deep pain, honesty, and courage. But it was Mandela's way of healing his country. In 1993, just before becoming president, Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This was a powerful moment, not just for South Africa, but for the world. Mandela, who had once been called a terrorist and locked away for life, was now honored as a man of peace. The Nobel Prize recognized not only his sacrifices, but also his vision for humanity. Millions of people around the globe celebrated. They saw in Mandela a living example of hope, of justice, and of forgiveness. He became a symbol, not just for South Africans, but for all human beings longing for freedom. The lesson Mandela left was simple, yet timeless. Courage, forgiveness, and love are stronger than hate. Hate destroys nations. Hate eats away at the human spirit. But love, courage, and forgiveness can rebuild, heal, and inspire. Mandela's own life was the perfect proof of this. He had every reason to hate, every reason to seek revenge, but he chose to love instead. And in doing so, he gave the world one of the greatest examples of leadership in history. Even after stepping down as president, Mandela did not stop serving. He continued to work for peace across the world. He spoke against poverty, against inequality, and against injustice in every form. He supported children's education, fought for those suffering from HIV and AIDS, and reminded leaders around the world of their duty to the people. Wherever he went, crowds followed. They did not just see a politician, they saw a hero. In 2013, the world wept as Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95. South Africa mourned deeply. Thousands of people filled the streets, holding candles, singing, and crying. Leaders from every nation traveled to honor him. The entire world paused to remember the man who had given so much and asked for so little in return. But while his body was gone, his dream remained alive. His words, his choices, and his example still echo in the hearts of millions. Mandela's life teaches us one of the most important truths. One person can change the world. You do not need to be rich, powerful, or born in a big city. Mandela began as a poor boy in a small village, herding cattle, running barefoot, and living a simple life. He faced injustice, prison, and great suffering. Yet he rose above it all. He forgave his enemies, united his people, and inspired humanity. If Mandela could do this, then no struggle is too big for us to overcome. And so his legacy lives on. His dream of a world built on courage, forgiveness, and love is not just history. It is a call to action. Each of us can carry a piece of Mandela's dream in our own lives. We can choose to forgive when it is easier to hate. We can choose to be brave when fear tries to stop us. We can choose to love when the world pushes us toward division. Nelson Mandela's story is not only the story of South Africa. It is the story of what humanity can achieve when we refuse to give up, when we refuse to hate, and when we choose the higher path of peace. His life was a gift to the world, and his legacy will live forever. So remember this. If Mandela, a boy from a poor village, could rise to inspire millions, then so can you. Whatever your struggle, whatever your pain, you can rise above it. You can change your life. And maybe, just maybe, you can also change the world. If this story of Nelson Mandela touched your heart, give this video a like. And if you believe, just like Mandela, that forgiveness and courage can change the world, then write in the comments, "I will be strong." When you write those words, you are not just typing. You are making a promise to yourself. A promise to face your struggles with courage, to forgive instead of hate, and to rise above the challenges in your life. I will read your comment, I will reply, and I will cheer you on because you are not alone in this journey. And don't forget to subscribe for more simple and powerful English lessons. Lessons that not only help you learn the language, but also give you wisdom from the greatest lives in history, so that your English learning becomes a journey of strength, hope, and transformation.